So at this point, we've all seen someone on Twitch receive a hype train. And if you haven't, it's basically the idea that whenever a bunch of people gift subs or bits, a event happens within the chat that has a level up goal that needs to be met within 5 minutes. That is filled by the streamer receiving more gift subs, more bits, or things like that. However, what you really don't see too much on Twitch, or at least I've never seen on Twitch, is a way to have a custom hype train that goes beyond what you see in the chat and extends to what you see on the overlay. And that's what we're going to be doing today. So as a prerequisite to this video, you're going to need to have a Twitch bot set up. You're going to want to have that Twitch bot connected to Twitch's webhook events, and you're also going to want to have a overlay attached to your bot and put into your OBS scenes. And I'll leave the links to those videos that I've done on those topics in the description. So now that you've seen all that, the first thing you want to do is you want to come to your overlay file and you want to add 3 divs. The first one you want to add is a div with the ID of hype train begin end. You can have this be whatever you want as long as you know what the ID is. You want to have a div of the hype train level, and you also want to have a div with an ID of the hype train progress. And then whenever you're done with that, go to your overlay JavaScript file, and within the global variables, you want to have 2 new variables, and these variables need to change, so they're not constant. So we want to say let, and the first one we want to have is the hype train level. We want this to be equal to -1, and then we want another variable, and we want this one to be called hype train total, and this is going to be equal to 0. So the hype train level is indicative of, as the name implies, the level of the hype train. So every time chat fills up one of the bars of the hype train challenge, it moves up to the next level of the challenge. And we want to keep track of what level we are on. So before a hype train ever begins, we want this to be at -1 to show that we're not doing anything with the hype train right now. And the hype train total is the total amount of points that has been gathered within a hype train. So bits and subs have different amounts of points involved. And so we need the total in order to keep track of a progress bar that we want to have be on the screen itself within the overlay and not just within the chat. So now that we have that, we can come down into our socket listener for the Twitch webhook events. And after we have all of these events that you see on the screen, we want to come down here and we want to add another conditional. So we want to say else if, and this is going to contain 3 conditions. So we want to say if the webhook event .subscription .type is equal to, as a string, the channel .hype train begin, hype train .begin event, like this, or the hype train progress event or the hype train end event. So I'll just copy and paste those in to save us some time, like this. So if we have a hype train beginning, a hype train progressing, meaning that a new cheer or a new gift sub or anything of the sort comes in, or if the hype train itself ends, we want to then begin checking for individual events within that. So the first one we want to actually check for is the hype train progress event, because that's going to be the one that happens the most often. So we're going to say if the webhook event or the webhook event .subscription .type is equal to the channel hype train progress event. So I'll just copy and paste it from here. Then what we want to do is we want to grab the webhook event. We want to grab the current total of the hype train. So we want to say the hype train total from that global variable that we declared up top is equal to the webhook event total. And this will allow us to keep track of how far we are in to the current level of the hype train. And then the next thing we want to do is we want to have a constant called hype train progress container. And that will be equal to the div that we have within our overlay HTML. So we want to say document.getElementById. We want to have the string of hype train progress. And then what we want to do is we want to say the hype train progress container .inner HTML is equal to currently an empty single quote string like this. And we're just going to leave this be for now. So the next thing that we want to do is we want to say that if the current level of the hype train is less than the level of the hype train that we are tracking, if it's greater than the hype train level that we are currently tracking, then we want to do something with that. So we want to come right here. We want to say if the webhook event level is greater than the hype train level that we are currently tracking, then what we want to do is we want to have it update the hype train level variable to the current hype train that we're just receiving. And then we're also going to create another constant to grab the hype train the hype train level container within our HTML. So we're going to say hype train level container is equal to a document.getElementById with the string of hype train level. And then just like before, we are going to say the hype train level container .inner HTML is equal to an empty single quote string. And then in addition, we want to have this be cleared after about 5 seconds. So we're going to have a set timeout which is just a function call. And this takes in 2 arguments, which the first one being a function in and of itself, and also the amount of time that we are waiting before we clear the event, or at least the overlay visual. So we're going to say 5,000 milliseconds, which is 5 seconds. And then within this function right here, we're just going to say the hype train level container .inner HTML is equal to, again, an empty single quote string. Now, if you're wondering why I'm just doing these empty strings right at first, what I'm going to do is set all of this up so that you can then have a template to set up your own HTML, should you so choose. And then later in the video, I'm going to show you how I do my HTML and CSS. So you can just get the information that you want if all you want is a template, or you can watch my entire process. And I should also point out that I inadvertently missed a conditional right here. So before we're checking the hype train total, or changing the hype train total, what we want to do is we want to have a conditional that says if the total that we just received is greater than the total that we are tracking, then we want to change the total that we are tracking. And the reason that we're doing this is because the Twitch webhook event system does not exactly guarantee that you are going to receive your events in the order that you see them. So you might actually receive a total that is less than the one that you are currently tracking. So if you're trying to create an actual progress bar within your overlay, it might jump all over the place instead of only progressing forwards. So we want to have this logic from before with the hype train total be within this conditional, and then the hype train level information be within this conditional. And next, we want to deal with whenever a hype train ends. So we want to have another conditional after the progress conditional. And we want to say else if the webhook subscription type is a channel hype train end event like this. What we want to do here is we want to first grab the div for the hype train beginning and ending container, and we want to also grab the div for the hype train progress container, so the progress bar that we would be creating on the screen. So we'll first grab the hype train beginning and ending container. So we're going to have a constant named hype train begin end container. And this is just going to be equal to a document get element by ID. And we're going to have as a string grabbing the hype train begin end div that we created within our HTML file. And also another constant, and this one's going to be called hype train progress container, just like above. And again, this one's going to be equal to a document get element by ID. And this one is going to have a string of hype train progress. And now what we want to do is we want to have the hype train begin end container inner HTML. We're going to have this equal to a empty single quote string, so we can use this later whenever we're setting everything up. And then we want to have a timeout function just like before. So we're going to say set timeout with a function and a timeout. In my case, I want this to time out after 1 minute. So this would be 60,000 milliseconds. So 60,000. And within this function, we want to reset both the hype train begin and end container. So the inner HTML here is going to be empty to an empty string. And also the same thing for the hype train progress container. Then we also want to reset the hype train level to -1 so that we can be ready for another hype train in the future. And then we want to set the hype train total to 0. And that's it for the hype train end event. And the hype train begin event is very similar. So we're going to say else if the webhook event.subscription.type equals the string of the channel.hype train begin event like this. Then we're going to do something very similar. We're first going to create another constant for the hype train begin end container. And then we're going to set the hype train begin end containers inner HTML to, you guessed it, an empty HTML or single quote string. And then we are going to set a timeout to 5 seconds to reset that HTML just as before, like this. And if this is all you wanted to know in order to create your own hype trains, you can stop watching the video right here. So thanks for watching, and I really appreciate it. Like and subscribe if this has helped you. However, if you want to see how I end up handling my own custom hype train, keep watching. So for me, the first thing that I'm going to do is I am going to move over to my CSS file to create my styles first. And so I'm going to give myself some padding so you can see everything on the screen. And then I'm going to come right here and I'm going to set a class called a hype train meter bar. And this is going to look very similar to how we set this up for the follow and subpoint progress bar that you see under my webcam that you see scrolling by every now and again. So this is going to have a display of inline block, a font size of 42 pixels, and this is going to be specific to your needs, but I need 42 pixels. And we want the text align to be center. And just to keep things from getting on the edges, we want to have a margin of 0 pixels on the top and the bottom and 4 pixels on the left and the right. And I want to deliberately set my width to the full width of the OBS screen. So in my case, this is going to be 1920 pixels. I could set this to 100%, but just to make sure that it works, I want to actually be deliberate and be, set that with pixels. And so the height, I want this to be 50 pixels because I don't want it to take up a huge portion of the screen. And I also want this to just sit right at the top of the screen. And I also want a background here, a semi-transparent background. So this is going to be a RGBA because we need the alpha channel for transparency. And the progress bar itself is going to be, the background for the progress bar is going to be white. So, or semi-transparent white. So we're just going to say 255, 255, 255 at 75% transparency. So 0.75. And that's it for this class. And now what we want to do is we want to have another class for the hype train meter progress. This one's going to be fairly simple. So I want the background to be a gradient. And I pulled this gradient off of a website, and I'll find the website that I used and leave it in the description. And so it just gives you a nice clean way to just copy and paste your CSS for any kind of gradient you want to create. So what I want is just a gradient that starts with this kind of darker blue right here and then leads into this kind of cyan color toward the end. Then I want the height to be 50 pixels, just like the other stuff. And I don't want any of the text within the progress bar itself to go to the next line because the text is going to be within the progress bar itself and not on the whole hype train meter bar. So in order to prevent your text from going to the next line, you want to avoid what's called text wrapping. And the way you do that within CSS is you want to say white dash space to no wrap, like I have it here. Now we want to create some animations. So something that I want to do each time that a hype train level goes up is I want to have a image that I use within my stream somewhat often just go flying across the screen from right to left. So I'm going to have a animation called hype train level up animation. And this is going to be pretty simple. So we just want it to go from 0%. We want the right position to be well off of the screen. So we want this to be at negative 50%. So we're starting off the screen to the right. And then at 100%, we want the right position to then be at 150%, so that it travels all the way across the screen and exits the left side of the screen. So now that we have that simple animation, what we're going to do is we're going to create another class, and we're going to call this the Hype Train Level Up Container. Now this is going to get a little hairy, and you'll see why whenever we get to the HTML JavaScript portion of it. But for now, we just need to accept that we have a container for this, and then also a separate animation for the image itself. So the container holding the image moves separately from the image itself, and I'll explain that in a bit. But within this Hype Train Level Up container, we first need the position to be absolute, and then we want to set the animation that we just created. So we want the animation name to be the Hype Train Level Up animation that we just created. We want the animation duration, for my purposes, to be 3 seconds. And then we want the animation fill mode to be forwards, so that the image stays all the way on the left side of the screen whenever the animation is complete. So now that we have that, we can move down a bit and create another class specifically for the hype train level up itself. And this is for the image that we are using to do the neat extra animations that we're doing within the hype train level up container. And within this class, we're just going to be sizing the image that we're going to be using. So we want the right position to start out at negative 50%. And then we want to set our height to the height of the OBS window that we are working with. So I'm going to explicitly set my height to 1080 pixels. So it'll fill the entire height of the screen because the image that I'm using is bigger than 1080 pixels. So then we want the width to be set automatically based on the height. That's everything that we need for the hype train level up events that we're going to be working with. So now what we want to do is we want to create another animation, and we're going to call this one the hype train begin end animation. This one's going to be a little more complex. So what we want to do here is we want to have some words that whenever a hype train begins and ends, we want it to start really small and then zoom in really close to the screen before it, as it's fading out. So like it's rushing at us. So at the beginning of a hype train, we want it to say hype train departed. And then whenever it gets to the end of a hype train, we want to say hype train arrived. So with this one, at 0%, we want our opacity to be at 0. We want this to be completely transparent. We want the color of our text to be silver for obvious reasons. And we want the font size of our words to be 8 pixels, so really small. And then at 5%, so very quickly, we want to have the opacity at 100%, so we can clearly see the words very quickly. And we want this to stay 100% for just a very short amount of time. So at 15%, we're going to set it at opacity of 100% again, so that it stays that way for just a short amount of time. And then for the remainder of the animation, so from 15% until the end of the animation, so at 100%, we want the opacity to be back at 0. So we want it to be completely transparent. And then also from the beginning of the animation to the end, we want the color to be changing from silver to cyan. And then we also want the font size to be absolutely enormous. So we want this to be 4096 pixels. We want this to just be giant so that it gives the illusion that it's zooming in towards us. And then we're going to create 2 more classes. And the first one being a container for the hype train beginning and ending events, just like before with the hype train level up stuff. So we're going to say hype train begin end container like this. And then we want to first have the position as absolute. We want this one to have a display of flex so that we can do some specific things, particularly with centering the words on the screen. So if your display is flex, you can have the text aligned both horizontally and vertically. So we want to have both of those be centered. So we want this to be vertically centered and horizontally centered like this. This is how you do it with a flex version of this. So we also want to have the top portion of this to be at 0 and the left portion of this to be at 0. So we want this to be locked at the top left corner of the screen to start. And we also want it to fill up the entire screen. So we want the width to be 100% as well as the height. And we also want the background to be transparent. Now that we have this, we just have one more class to create, which is the hype train begin and end class. this is what's going to have our animation applied to it. So we're going to start off with this. This is the text itself. It's going to be an opacity of 0, so this is completely transparent. And we want the color to be set to silver for obvious reasons. We want the font size to be 8 pixels. And then we want the text align to be centered. So we want to make sure that everything that we're doing is centered. And just like before, with the progress bar, we don't want any text wrapping. Because if you have text wrapping, what's going to happen is as the font size gets bigger and bigger and bigger, it's going to try and contain all the words within the screen. And we don't want that to happen. We just want that to just zoom right at it. It's just the same size that it is no matter what, or the same orientation that it is no matter what. And then we apply the animation information. So we have the animation name of the hype train begin in animation. We want the animation duration to be 10 seconds. It's not gonna feel like it lasts 10 minutes. And then we want the animation fill mode to be forward, like this. And now we can get rid of all of our padding. So this takes care of everything for our CSS file. Now comes in the nasty stuff within the JavaScript HTML itself. So this is how I handle the JavaScript, for the events themselves. And for the first event that we're looking at the hype train progress bar first. So for this one where it says the webhook event total being greater than the hype train total that we're tracking. So within this, we're going to want to do is we want to have a containing div. And for some reason, whenever I set this up with inline styling. But this does give us an opportunity to explore what styling with HTML, just directly within a HTML element, looks like. So if you want to do this directly within an HTML element, what you can do is you can just, as a tag, or as an attribute, have a style attribute, and then you can just work with CSS in the way that you would expect. So we're going to have a width of 100%. This is the containing div, mind you. And then you want to have the position of absolute. And then you want to also ensure that your top and left positions are at 0. That's it for that. So we'll just bring this stuff down for readability's sake. And then within this containing div, we're going to have another div with a class name of the hype train meter bar. And within this div, we are going to actually track the progress of our current level of the hype train itself. So this div is actually rather self-contained, just the way that it is. However, within this div, we need another div. This div needs to have a dynamic width. So we're going to, just like before, have a style attribute here, and we're going to say the width. And if you recall from our previous video on tracking the follow goals and the sub goals, what we did is we had to do some very careful string manipulation in order to run some math. So what we're going to do is first have a single quote right there, and then right here, just close it with a single quote and a percent sign, because this is going to be a percentage that we're actually tracking with the math that we're doing. So let me move this stuff down for readability first. And the way that we're going to get this width is we need to run some math. So first thing we need to do is we need to round everything that we're doing down, no matter what. The way that you do that is you say math.floor. And this just contains a single argument of the number that we're rounding down. So the first thing we need to do is divide first the total that we currently have, the progress that we currently have into the next event from the goal of the current hype train level. Sorry, that probably sounded confusing. So what we're doing is we're taking the progress of the current hype train level, you get it like this, and you divide it by the amount of points that you need in order to obtain the next level of the hype train. So in this case, it would be the the webhook event goal. And then what we want to do is multiply that division by 100 so that we can get the math necessary, in a good whole number. So after the closed double quote here, what we need to do is we need to add another class to this, and we want this to be the hype train meter progress. Just bring that down here to maintain readability, and then we'll also bring this down. Now, for the content of the progress bar, what we want some text, and we want this to have our current level. So we're going to say level, and then the webhook event level that we're currently at, and then a colon and a space. And then we're just going to run the same math that we did right here to get the percentage that we had just a minute ago, like this, and then bring it down to readability, and then plus single quotes, and then a percentage. And that's it for that. Now, the hype train level stuff is going to be quite a bit more hairy. So up to this point, we've been creating our HTML for everything that we've been doing using the variable of the name, that we're grabbing for the div within our HTML document, and then saying dot inner HTML. This will not work for what we're attempting to do because we are creating both elements within HTML as well as animation dynamically. And so we need to do this in a much more long form fashion. So to just show why frameworks like React became so popular is because of what I'm about to just show you right now. So in order to do something dynamic, like create a animation dynamically that changes slightly based on a certain type of event, or really just anything that is more dynamic than just changing how something looks, with a simple progress bar or anything like that. You need to create your elements within the HTML individually within JavaScript. So, and then assign them all as attributes, and let's just get into it so you can see what I'm talking about. So the first thing that we're going to do is we are going to create a div. So we're going to say a constant of hype animation container. And this is going to equal to document. And if you think I'm about to say get element by ID, this is where things get nasty. We're going to say create element. And then we're going to have the string as a div. So this is the container that's going to contain the entire animation that we're about to do. And in order to give this div a class, what we're going to have to do is say hype train or hype animation container dot class list dot add. And this is going to be our hype train level up container, like this. So what I just did is the equivalent of doing something like this. So taking a div and then saying class equals hype train level up container, just like that. However, we're having to go about this the long way because we need this to be more dynamic. So that's the equivalent. So next, what we're going to want to do is to grab the image for the hype train that we are animating. So we're going to have a constant. We're going to say hype animation image. And this is going to be equal to a document dot create element. This one is going to be img. Just the same strings here as you would use for the HTML element tags themselves. And this is where all of our dynamic stuff is going to be coming in, or at least most of it. So then what we're going to do, we're going to say the hype animation image source. So where we're pulling this image from is my assets folder, which you can see on the left side of the screen right here, /good.png. And I'll show you how all of this looks at the end of the video. And then we want to have the hype animation image have a class. So we're going to say hype animation image dot class list dot add. And this is going to be the hype train level up class. And now we want to set some more specific CSS than what we had in the CSS file. So we're going to say is the hype animation image dot style dot transform origin. And what this is doing is it's causing the image to, we want the image to spin. And so this is going to change to where it doesn't grab it exactly at the center. It grabs it at the left side, on the left side horizontally and vertically in the center. So, or at least, slightly off to the left. So we want to say 25% space 50%. And this is going to create a somewhat ununiform spin to this. So this right here, what we're about to do is why we needed to do all of this so deliberately to begin with. So we want to say hype animation image dot animate. And this takes in a few arguments. So the first thing we want to do is we want to have a array. And within this array, we have an object. And within this object, we're going to put in the CSS that we're trying to animate with. So in this case, we want to transform this image. So, or at least rotate it. So the way that you do that is you put in transform and then single quote string. We're going to say rotate with a open parenthesis. Plus, for every level of the hype train that this goes up, we want the image to spin faster. So we're going to say plus 360 degrees. So we want one complete flip for each level of the animation, or for each level of the hype train. So 360 degrees times the webhook event dot level. So for a level 1 hype train, this will just flip one time. And then for a level 2 hype train, it'll flip 2 times, then 3, then 4, as it travels across the screen. So to add a little bit more variation to what we're doing. So we want plus, single quote, degrees, and then close parenthesis. Now for the second argument here, we need another object that defines the duration of the animation. So the duration here, we want this to last for 3 seconds. So this goes in milliseconds. So this would be 3,000 milliseconds. So now what we want to do is we want to shove this image into the animation container defined up here. Because currently both of these HTML elements are separate from each other. We need the image to be contained within the container. So what we want to do is we want to say the hype animation container dot append child, which means just take the thing that I'm handing you and shove it into the element that you are. So we want to append the child of the hype animation image. And that's that if all you wanted to do was a visual element of this. However, I also want some audio to play here. So I'm going to go a bit further. And I'm going to create a new constant called hype audio. And this is going to be a document that create element of audio. And I want this audio to play automatically. So hype audio dot autoplay needs to be equal to true. And then we want to create another constant called hype audio source. And this is going to be equal to a document create element of source. And this is what's going to actually contain the audio file that is being played. So the hype audio source dot source, src, is going to be equal to the assets folder from before slash hype train, which, as you can see on the left, I created a hype train audio folder, or just a hype train folder, slash, you can see on the left over here, slash level. And you can see that I have all of my file names for the hype train audio that I have, just level 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, all the way down to 14. So because Twitch no longer caps the level at which you can do a hype train, I just created a bunch of these. So level plus webhook event dot level, and then plus dot mp3. And in order for this to play properly, we also need to set the type of the audio being played. So we're going to say hype audio source type is equal to audio slash MPEG, like this. And then we want to shove the audio source into the audio container. So we're going to say hype audio dot append child, and then we're appending the hype audio source. And then to finish all of this off, we're going to say that the hype train level container needs to contain both the hype animation container, so the image, and the audio. So we're going to say the hype animation container dot append child. It's going to say the hype animation container. Sorry, the hype animation container. Can you see why now this is so confusing and it makes frameworks like React so valuable? Because this used to be everything that websites would do, was just stuff like this. So the next up, we're going to say the hype train level container dot append child. Then we're going to shove in the hype audio. And that's it. We're done. So all of this insanity is going to allow us to have a dynamically animated image with dynamically generated sound. So, but you have to go through some pretty hefty trouble to be able to do that. However, the hype train ending and beginning things are much, much simpler. Like we can do these in a single line if we wanted to. So, which actually I will. And then I'll just break it down for visibility's sake. So what we're going to do is within this empty string right here, we're going in the channel hype train end event. We're going to create a div, and this div is going to have a class of hype train begin end container. And within this div, we need another div. And this div is going to have a class name of hype train begin end. And then the content of the hype train, or the content of this div is just going to say hype train arrived. So this is the end of the hype train. However, we're not going to leave it as just like this. We want the word arrived to be on a separate line from the rest of the text. So the way that we do this is we're going to have another element here. We're going to say 20 brackets br slash. This is just a break within HTML. So if you want to create or force a new line within HTML, you use this. So hype train is going to be on the first line, and then arrived is going to be on the second line. And we're just going to add in some exclamation points. And then we can just bring all of this down for readability. And that's it. And for the hype train beginning event, we can just copy and paste this and simply change the word that we're using to departed. So it's all the same. So with this, we're going to say the hype train has departed. So whenever a hype train starts, we're going to say that a hype train has departed. Whenever a hype train ends, we're going to say that it's arrived. And that is everything that you need to know to create your own hype train, down to the nitty gritty, nasty HTML that you have to trade the super old-fashioned way. And I'll, as the video ends, show you how this looks, for each level of the hype train, and also the beginning and ending of it. So it's probably already playing a little bit of it as I start off, or end off, just say, and just enjoy it. So click up here if you want to check out the rest of the Build a Twitch Bot from Scratch series. And until next time, Jesus loves you. Stay awesome. Double train, triple train, overtrain, train-tacular, train-atrocity, train-manjaro, train-tastrophe, train-apocalypse, train-air, mega train, ultra train, monster train, ludicrous train.